Hi everyone. Just bought your first lobster tail and you're not quite sure what to do with it? Or one step earlier than that, you're thinking of buying one but you're a little nervous about shelling out close to $100 for two of them? Well, stick with me and I'll show you an easy, foolproof way to cook them. So let's get to the kitchen and check it out. Hi everyone. Today's video is going to be on cooking lobster tails. The first thing that you have to decide when you're going to cook a lobster tail is if you're cooking the lobster tail for presentation or for flavor. If you're going for presentation, there's a zillion videos out there on how to do a lobster tail that you put on top of the shell and then you broil it, and it's great looking, but the problem with cooking a lobster that way is it's really easy to burn it because you can't see what's going on. You just put it in the broiler section of the oven and you take your chances. There's a much more controlled way to cook a lobster tail, and to be honest, nothing looks better than a lobster presented on top of a shell like that. But if you're going to spend $36 or $42 or more on a lobster tail, to me, you want the lobster tail to taste really succulent. So the video that I'm going to show you today is going to be on how to take the meat out of the shell and cook the meat by itself in a saute pan where you can actually see what the meat is doing and tell when it's done. And it's sauteed in butter, and we're just doing regular butter, and then at the end we're going to reduce a bottle of wine down into the butter and make a butter wine sauce. But you can also saute it in garlic, or you can add some thyme or rosemary, or add whatever spices and seasonings you want. But the idea in general is to cut the medallions into the lobster tail into little medallions and saute them in butter, and then you have a beautiful tasting, perfectly prepared lobster that's not all tough and rubbery and $40 down the drain. So let's get into the kitchen and give it a try. Okay, we're going to start with our lobster tail. I have a chef knife, which I sharpened before this video, and just a random pair of scissors. These are special kitchen scissors that you can get better angles with. And here is our lobster tail, and we're just going to take it out carefully and get rid of this bag which has a lot of juice in it. So the way we want to prep our lobster tail is very carefully cut across the very top. And don't cut into the meat, just cut the top, and then come along to the bottom and cut the bottom, and then very carefully we're going to peel our lobster. And these shells are really, really sharp, so you want to be careful that you don't cut yourself on them. So we're going to peel it as best we can, and we're going to wind up with our lobster tail with no peel on it. And then we're going to trim the lobster tail. So cut a little, peel a little, cut a little bit more, and eventually you'll be able to get all the way to the end. And run your finger down underneath the shell. Don't just pull the shell off, see, because this part is sticking. So run your finger underneath it like that and get those little parts out. And what you're going to wind up with is a beautiful lobster tail, which is way better than what you'll get in a grocery store. As I mentioned during the intro, if you're going to use an expensive ingredient, really splurge on it and get a lot of it. And this was a lesson that I learned with truffles. I bought some real truffles and I didn't put enough on. It was enough so that it was expensive, but not enough to really taste it. So it essentially wasted the truffles because there wasn't enough on to taste. So what we're going to wind up with, if we're really careful, is a very nice lobster tail. And you want to get this last bit down here in the tail, which is going to stick and put up a fight, but you'll be able to get it out. There we go. Now get rid of the shells and the other things that you don't need. And now this next part is kind of up to you. You want to trim this, but you don't want to lose too much out. If you trim it so that it's really pretty, you're going to lose a lot of it. But what you want to do is trim it into nice medallions And these pieces right here, don't throw them out because we can use these for other things. We can cook them and chop them up and make ravioli with them, or we can put them in macaroni and cheese, or we can put them in any kind of other items, in any kind of a cream sauce over lobster. There's a million things to do with them, so we're going to save those. And then this is the medallion that we're going to be using. And we're going to cut that into pretty much equal parts like that. And then we're going to baste these in butter. And then once we baste these in butter and get them nicely cooked, then we will throw a little wine in with the butter, and we'll have a little butter wine sauce. So that's what we wound up with from a $36 lobster tail. It's not an awful lot, although there is the scrap that we can use. But the neater you trim them, the better the presentation. But for an expensive lobster tail, see, we've already lost a quarter of it for these trimmings here, which we will use for something else. But we want the absolute lobster itself to be as beautiful and pretty as we can. So now we're going to go ahead and saute this in butter. So as long as we're going through the trouble to use expensive ingredients, we're going to use some really nice Kerrygold pure Irish butter, which is good stuff. Do a side-by-side taste test, and the difference is amazing. So we're going to get some of our butter, put it in the pan, turn the pan on, and we want to be sure that we have our wine ready to go into our wine sauce. So you want to have your wine open, and you definitely want to be tasting your wine to make sure it's good. So pour yourself a glass of wine to have while you're doing your cooking. So we're going to need a fair amount of butter because we're going to be sauteing this. And if you want to be a purist, you can clarify the butter, but we're not going to go through that step. We're just going to go ahead and use this butter right here. These do not need to cook very long, and so on account of the fact that they don't need to cook very long, you're not as likely to burn the butter. So all you need is a nice soup spoon that you can use to baste your lobster with. So what you're going to do is melt down this butter, and it looks like a lot of butter, but it's not really. It's actually probably a little too much for only one lobster tail. I'm used to doing 2 at a time, so we'll take a little bit of the butter off. And we're not going to season the lobster. We're not going to put any spices on them because we want just a pure buttery lobster experience. So once we get this melted, we're going to put the lobster in and then start our cooking process. You want to have a way to turn the lobster pieces over, so you can either use a fork for that or you can use a little pair of tongs. So our butter is nicely melting. So we're going to go ahead and very carefully put our lobster pieces in there, and they will start to cook right away, and you don't want them too hot, and this is too hot, so we're going to turn that back down. And you want these to be cooked slightly undercooked because they're going to continue to cook once you take them off of the fire. And for all the trouble that we're going through, so you want to baste it a little bit with your spoon, and all the trouble that we're going through, we do not want to burn these. Remember, that's the advantage to cooking them in a frying pan. You can tell when they're getting done, as opposed to broiling them in the oven when you really have no clue and you're just taking your chances. So we're going to go ahead and turn these over. They're already looking awesome. So you can see the part that's done is turning opaque, whereas the part that's not done is translucent. So once you get it turned over, if we had a bigger lobster tail, and maybe if we'd been able to get one that wasn't frozen, we would get a better presentation. But this was a frozen lobster tail. It was the biggest one that I could get. So we had to kind of go with what was available because it is the off-season. You're going to want to have a warm plate to put these on, And you want to be ready to eat. You want to have everything else ready to go, because when these are done, you want to put them on the plate, have the plate all with the side dishes and everything and ready to go. So we can already see our lobster is starting to stiffen up a little bit, which means that it's getting done. It doesn't cook very long, so we're going to get our plate out. And we're going to use a nice plate for these, seeing as how we're going to town with dinner. We just want to have a nice meal all the way down. So the way that you tell if this is done is you just kind of touch it, and if it springs back, then it's ready. If you don't really trust your gauge on your finger, you can make a slight incision into one of these pieces. Nobody will ever see it. Just get a sharp paring knife and cut into one of the pieces to see if it's done. So we'll just cut in right there. And that is not quite done. As you can see, I don't know if this camera will focus or not, but as you can see, no, I guess it's not going to focus. As you can see, it's still a little bit translucent in there. So we're just going to go another minute or two, although the rest of the pieces are looking good. So the presentation isn't always as good as the actual lobster tail on top of the lobster, but this way you'll be sure that it's done properly, so it's going to taste an awful lot better. So we're going to go ahead. These are done now. So remember, you want them to be slightly underdone, because you see how hot they are. They're continuing to cook. So we're going to go ahead and plate these. So I'm just doing a simple plating on a nice plate, and then we're going to throw some wine in. And scrape up that fond from the bottom. And reduce the sauce, turn the heat up so you can get it nice and reducing down. And once you get it reduced down, we're just going to spoon it over the top of our lobster, and that's all there is to it. So it's a super easy way to do lobster. The lobster will be cooked perfectly every time, and you have the shells left over that you can make a fond with. And if you want to, one thing that you can do, which I think I will do, rather than make ravioli, is we're just going to take these little trimmings and I chop them up and I'm going to put them in there. So with our little lobster pieces chopped up, that's going to give more flavor to the sauce, and it'll just give a little texture, and it'll cut down on the waste. So once these little pieces are done, and you don't want to put them in until your sauce is almost all the way reduced, because if you put them in too early, all these little pieces, you won't be able to fish them out, and they'll turn into little pieces of rubber, which you definitely don't want. So that's a nice consistency of the sauce right there. We're going to turn our burner off, and then we're going to go ahead and plate this sauce. I can't put the plate on this burner or it'll crack because the burner is really hot, so hold on 2 seconds while I move it. So we're off the stove, our sauce is all ready, our little lobster trimmings are all ready. So we're just going to go ahead and put our lobster trimmings on the top, and we're going to put our sauce on the lobster like that. And if you want to be a purist, you can put a little parsley on the top. Otherwise, that is ready to go. That is perfect. So congratulations on a job well done. Don't be shy about trying it. Let me know how you make out. Subscribe, and we'll have more videos on how to do gourmet food projects like this. So make sure you hit that like button and subscribe. We'll see you in the next video. Yum, yum. Bon appetit. Here we've reduced down our sauce a little bit more. If you like a thicker sauce, you reduce it down almost to where it's burning. Don't let it burn all the way. And if it splits on you like this is starting to split, that means you've gotten a little bit too much of the moisture out of it. So you can just add a little bit more wine to it, and that will bring the sauce back to life. It's a miracle. Anytime a buttery sauce splits, you just need to go back and add a little bit more liquid to it. You can use water, you can use wine, anything you want to use. So now we're back. Our sauce is unsplit and it's nice and thick. So now if we just wanted a slightly thicker sauce with a little bit more flavor, this would be it. So we're gonna pan that onto our lobster, and that's just gonna give it a little bit more flavor. And if we have a vegetable that we want a little lobster sauce on, we can go ahead and put the rest of the sauce on a side vegetable. There you go. That's all there is to it.